We are the certain and the seeking, the lifers and the newcomers, the beloved and the brokenhearted, the insiders and the rejected, all of whom have found a home in the extraordinary yet intimate community of Unitarian Universalism. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Amherst. I am Lauraine Marcus, and my pronouns are she, her. We are so glad you have chosen to be here, virtually and in person. Our minister, Reverend Michelle Buchheit, is on sabbatical leave through August. Services during this time will include guest speakers from as far away as Portugal and as close to home as Amherst.
As we gather, we acknowledge that our church is built on land that was once nurtured and cherished by the First Nation people of this region, the Haudenosaunee, and the people known as the Neutrals before them. May we continue to tend and cherish this cherished land and courageously cultivate community with all living beings. It's been said that Unitarian Universalism is the religion that puts its faith in you, trusting each individual to engage in the spiritual journey and to reach our own conclusions about spiritual matters. We do that in beloved community as we support one another in faith and friendship. In that spirit, this congregation has created a covenant, a sacred promise of how we will strive to be with one another. Please join me in speaking our covenant.
Together we promise to gather in compassionate community, to celebrate diversity of thought and unity of spirit, and seeking wholeness for ourselves, our children, and our world.
We begin each gathering by lighting the chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. Our flaming chalice represents the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of our commitment to foster more compassion and justice in the hurting world. Our chalice lighting words come from the traditional Wiccan affirmation of oneness of life. The circle is cast. We are between the world, beyond the bound of space and time, where birth and death, night and day, joy and sorrow meet as one. Blessed be. Each of us carries into this worship time cares and concerns, joys and sorrows. Together, we create the container where we can put down our burdens, knowing they are held gently in this gathered community for those joining virtually. I invite you to give voice to that which is on your heart, or perhaps type into the chat in the live stream. For those in the chapel, I invite you to come forward and place a stone or shell on the table labyrinth in recognition of that which is in your heart. the Buffalo community suffered a horrific pain of multiple lives lost and injured in the name of racial hatred. May we keep in our hearts the families who have been so grievously changed by this act, and may we recommit ourselves to coming together to do the work of love. Please join me in the communal response. In this gathered community, together we have lit a candle of sorrow and concern for the people of Ukraine and Russia and our community and all the people and the more than human family of life on earth. We include in the circle of compassion and all care all those who are impacted by acts of aggression and terror. We pray for peace and compassion in our war-torn world. In this gathered community, we hold the world in love. Please rise in body or spirit as we raise our voices together in the hymn Blue Boat Home, in the teal hymnal, hymn number 1064.
Slow below me, I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. With the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun my sail and moon my rudder, heaven lay the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions. I'm kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the light of the heavens in our beautiful blue I give thanks to the wind of morning, hail the great winds urging me on. Greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port I have known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat.
Our opening words today are from a statement, is about a statement on the Buffalo shootings. We begin with truth-telling and moving together in that truth. by the Side with Love organizing strategy team. It begins. On Saturday, an 18-year-old white supremacist carried out a premeditated fatal attack on the black community in Buffalo, killing 10 and injuring many more. Today, we mourn the 10 unique, precious lives of the people murdered in Buffalo. Church elders, civil rights activists, grandmothers, parents, and small children. We grieve. We grieve with this community as they reel from this violence and collective trauma. Top Supermarket, it's more than just a grocery store. It's a unique space that the community created to meet essential needs. The shooter's plan was specifically designed to target the beating heart of the black community, take an aim at a nexus of community care, resources, and resiliency. This is the essence of white supremacist ideology. The elimination of not only black and people of color as individuals, but entire communities and cultures. Given the persistent white supremacist attacks in our nation's history, it is just dishonest and irresponsible to call these isolated incidences. We will not cause further harm by calling this a mental health issue. We must refuse complacency of accepting that this is simply a gun reform issue. This is the expected consequence of a nation that has yet to confront an ideology that proclaims whiteness is superior and treats blackness as less valuable or a threat. Shootings like these are not an affront to the Americans' deepest values. They are an embodiment of them. In all too familiar moments, we recall these words from the song "Tell It Like It Is" by Tracy Chapman. Tracy says, "Say you'll never close your eyes or pretend that it's a rosy world. Say you'll never try to paint what is rotten with a sugar coat. Say you'll talk about the horrors you've seen and the torment you know. And tell it like it is." The latest attack is the result of a society that is rooted in white supremacy. This violence begins with people aligning themselves with white supremacy. However it shows up in our lives. It shows up with believing that white lives should be protected over black lives. It shows up with packaging genocidal movements in language like replacement theory. It shows up when the media calls Mike Brown an 18-year-old man and the Buffalo shooter a white teenager. White supremacy is all its expressions. In all its expressions is violence. And until we collectively commit to eradicating this root structure, this violence will continue. We must keep telling the truth, keep fighting, keep building a shared story and a collective power, because in our bones, in our very bones, we know another world is possible. As Black movement builder and director of the Working Families Party, Mo Mitchell, said, If you don't think change is possible, organizing is not your ministry. Close quote. We begin with truth-telling and moving together in that truth. Another world is possible if we build it together. It really is possible if we build it together. Today, our speaker, Nathan Hollister, will visit us later in the service via video. Reverend Nathan Hollister is a third-generation Unitarian Universalist whose grandparents founded 4 of our congregations. He has been a community organizer for over 20 years and has been active nationally in our faith since he was a teenager. He serves as adjunct faculty at Meadville Lombard, for which he graduated in 2013. NATO also leads the ministry of the Sacred Fire Unitarian Universalist, which plants and grows covenant communities and which trains and equips our congregations to be more effective and impactful in their work for racial and social justice. He lives in central North Carolina and spends his extra time fomenting rebellious communities, playing in punk and metal bands, and competing in the Highland Games.
We move on to Time for All Ages, and this is a book called Pitter and Patter by Martha Sullivan and illustrated by Kathy Morrison. Pitter and patter dropped from a cool gray cloud one day. Pitter landed on a leaf of an oak tree. Hello, squirrel. Good morning, blue jay. Rise and shine, caterpillar. He dripped on the stream below. Hello, crayfish. Howdy, snake. Best wishes for the day, mayfly. The stream carried Pitter down into the valley. Hello, fox. Greetings, deer. Pleasure to see you again, hawk. It flowed into a winding river. Hello, trout. Good day, dragonfly. All good things to you, otter. The river poured into a wetland of tall, swaying grasses. Hello, crab. Nice to meet you, shrimp. A happy day to you, heron. The wetlands met the ocean. Hello, turtle. A treasure as always, Ray. See you again soon, jellyfish. Meanwhile, Patter had landed in a spring meadow. Hello, Daisy. Good morning, bee. Rise and shine, butterfly. She trickled down into a dark, damp soil. Hello, is anybody here? Oh, hi, Aunt there, Aunt. Howdy, earthworm. Best wishes for the day, mole. She traveled deeper and spilled into the stream of an underground cave. Hello, bat. Greetings, salamander. A pleasure to see you again, cricket. The stream flowed into a river. Hello, beaver. Good day, mink. All good things to you, salmon. And the river swept Patter out to the sea. A happy day to you, seal. So nice to meet you, squid. Hello, Pitter. In the midst of sea spray, Pitter and Patter met the warm rays of the sun. They became warmer and lighter. They floated up to the sky where they joined their old cloud, the old friend, the gray cloud.
I want to say to my sisters and my brothers, keep the faith. When the storm flies and the wind blows, go on at a steady pace. When the battle is fought and the victory's won, we can all shout together, have overcome. Talk to the Father and the Son when we make it to the promised land. We can walk together, little children. We don't ever have to worry, 'cause through this world of trouble, we've got to love one another. Let us take our fellow man by the hand, try to help him to understand. We can all be together forever and ever when we make it to the promised land. That Bible reads, "Thou shalt not be afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in the darkness, nor for destruction that waiteth in the noonday hour." We got to walk together, little children. We don't ever have to worry, 'cause through this world of trouble, we've got to love one another. Let us take our fellow man by the hand, try to help him to understand. We can all be together forever and ever when we make it to the promised land. This world is not our home, we're only passing through. Our trail is all made up way beyond the blue. Let us do the very best that we can while we're traveling through this land. We can all be together, shaking a hand when we make it to the promised land. We can walk together, little children. We don't ever have to worry, 'cause through this world of trouble, we got to love one another. Let us take a fellow man by the hand, try to help him to understand. We can all be together forever and ever when we make it to the promised land. We can 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 make it to the promised land. Oh, we can all be together forever and ever when we make it to the promised land. We can walk together, little children. We don't ever have to worry, 'cause through this world of trouble, we got to love one another. Let us take our fellow man by the hand and try to help him to understand. We can all be together forever and ever when we make it to the promised land. Yes, we can all to the promised land. Oh, oh.
Good morning, UU Amherst. I'm overjoyed to be here virtually with you, and I want to extend my gratitude to your congregation and also to the wonderful Reverend Michelle, who was one of my classmates at Meadville Lombard Theological School, and we became very wonderful friends. As you heard in my intro earlier, I'm a third-generation UU, and much of my work has been planting and growing covenanted communities, which are similar to congregations, and mostly planting those with religiously unaffiliated young people across the country. In addition to that work, my calling is to work with our congregations to be more effective and impactful in our efforts at social justice. And one further note, as I am at home, my cat Finnegan may be joining us in worship this morning, so we also have that to be grateful for. Our culture can be referred to as a culture of separation. We are divided within ourselves and from one another. We're divided by severe racial and economic injustice, cut off from connection with wider community and from the earth by our culture's institutions. And we've seen with our experience in COVID that this all the more being separated from one another. And so I want us to think about that culture that we live within as we imagine the ways that we are now coming back together and how we might do that very deliberately. So in our recent times, we've faced the threat of criminalization of the other, the demonization of immigrant and refugee people. We're threatened by a rise in white nationalism and the very real specter of authoritarianism. And what I refer to as the death throes of white supremacy can be very clearly and tragically seen in the recent events there in your community. Looking more broadly at the state of the world, we can say that we live also in a time of crisis. Now, every generation claims that they live in important times, and they're all pretty much correct. The reason why right now is so important is, one, because since the 50s, humanity has had the capability to completely destroy itself with nuclear and biological weapons. We live in that reality. Add to that the fact that we live in the times of the greatest wealth disparity in history, and the fact that we face an environmental crisis that might not be reversible. Now, it's not my attempt to be alarmist here or just harp on, all the negatives, but maybe just gently alarmist. In philosophy, there's a concept called soft thought, where we kind of think something's true. So my viewpoint here could be called a soft apocalypticism, that we're living in what could possibly be the era before a calamity or a great decline. And we all feel it, don't we? At least a little bit. And certainly COVID has given us a lens through which to see that. And certainly young people today do, by and large. My generation is the first one that can't expect to do better than their parents. And personally, I'm aspiring to be a stay-at-home son. But we can just take a look at much of our popular media, books and movies and comics today. There's a wonderful bookstore in my community called Flyleaf Books here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And there's the section for young adult readers literally says young adult / dystopian. So our media is overwhelmingly dystopian. It's zombies, it's dictatorships, it's environmental devastation, economic collapse. We feel it. And there's an urgency to that we need to be acting. We need to be exploring together what I call collectively dreaming about the world that could be and actively working toward it. I think first and foremost, in our work of healing the wounds of separation, of our culture of separation, is to work toward racial justice. That's, I think, the largest thing that pulls us apart, and we feel that all too keenly right now. In addition, in our culture and in our Unitarian Universalist faith, we have a very strong streak of individualism. And individualism in our faith often takes the individual religious experience and makes that central, whereas other more emerging faiths and theologies within our Unitarian Universalism, like liberation theology, looks to the collective experience. And I think we need to lean very much into that collective experience. So how do we start to do that? How do we start to explore that with one another? There's a quote that came out of the Spanish Revolution in the 1930s, when the anarchists and communists were fighting the fascists and unfortunately lost. But within those times, there was a saying among many of the anarchists and leftists. They said, "Those who proclaim to have principles, but who have no programs for social change, turn out in the end to have no principles." So I really take that as a wonderful challenge to us if we capitalize principles in that little quote. What are our programs for social change? What is our vision? What are we dreaming of and pulling into reality? What are we incarnating? Our 7 principles talk of us being part of the interdependent web of all existence. And so what I get to thinking is, what would it be like if we were to actually live as if we were truly interdependent? What if we were to practice interdependence? Like, for instance, what does interdependence look like on a Tuesday when the kids need to get to school and the car won't start? What does that look like within our communities and within our families, and especially within our congregations? There was a minister named John Haynes Holmes, who Unitarian minister, who in the early 1900s was helping to start the ACLU and the NAACP, and became personal friends with Gandhi. So kind of cool dude. But he wrote a book called The Revolutionary Function of the Modern Church. And in that, he describes the concept that if all relationships are actually religious between us, because all of our faith is about relationship and interdependence, then what we must do is make religion coincident with life. And whenever I hear our hymn that calls us to give life the shape of justice, this is what I think about. So that's some of what I'm trying to describe as living into our interdependence. And we have examples of what this could look like, and I'll tell you a couple. One is, there was one of the earliest mutual aid societies in our country. It was called the Free African Society. The Free African Society was in Philadelphia in the late 1700s of free, formerly kidnapped and enslaved African people. And it was a community that was for spiritual fulfillment, social fulfillment, and economic fulfillment, all wrapped into one. And for instance, one of the stories about that is during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, when they were writing the Constitution, a yellow fever epidemic broke out. And all the so-called founding fathers all fled the city back to their manors and plantations and lands so as to not be sick. Well, the Free African Society was set up, and they distributed hundreds and hundreds of blankets and meals and medical care to the wider community because they were set up to do so. And this I take as a huge inspiration for us and for our work and what we could be in our communities and in our wider world. And another piece of that is that from the Free African Society emerged the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So that's where its roots were. So what we're really talking about is living into interdependence and caring for one another, giving life that shape of justice. There was another little example that I said I'd throw in there, since we have a tiny bit more time before I get to looking at how we kind of shape alternatives with one another. And that is of the Black Panther Party. So J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, said he said that he was talking about what the most dangerous thing the Black Panther Party ever did. And it wasn't being armed or demonstrations and the like. He said the most dangerous thing they did was their children's breakfast program. Feeding children in the community, building community, supporting one another, actually embodying interdependence. And so I want us to be that dangerous. Now, how do we go about doing that? How do we go about actually incarnating the world that we dream about, especially as we respond to the recent tragedy, and especially as we emerge from the epidemic, as we are all hoping to fully do? There was this dude named Buckminster Fuller. Many of you have heard of him, and he said something about how we change things. He said this: you don't change something by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you build a new model that renders the old model obsolete. And I think he might have gotten the idea from his great aunt, the legendary Unitarian Margaret Fuller, who was one of the transcendentalists at the time. And Margaret Fuller was the first woman to be allowed in the Harvard University library, because at the time, of course, it was only open to wealthy white men. She was the first one allowed to study in the Harvard University library because she was regarded to be the best read person in New England. So pretty, that's why I say the word legendary. And she wrote the first major work of feminism, Women in the 19th Century. But this is what Margaret Fuller did with her access. She copied the entire the current Harvard curriculum of the times. And since other women could not study at Harvard, and people of color could not study at Harvard, and people without a lot of money the same, she started something called the Salon, where this group of women taught the Harvard curriculum to one another. So she created a new model, an alternative institution, when there wasn't access to the existing one. And I really think that that's the way things change. In my lifelong study of social transformation, that's what I've seen be the most effective, is building a new model that renders the old model obsolete. And now we have history in this in our Unitarian Universalist congregations, because what we could be called our early forebears in our faith could be called kind of the radical left wing of the Reformation. So rejecting the authority and the hypocrisy and the corruption of Rome, along with others in the Reformation in Europe. However, while most folks in the Reformation were rejecting Rome, they were putting in place their local government, like the Church of England, for instance. But the early Unitarians did not do that. They said, no, we want to be free congregations. And that's really where our free congregation tradition came from. And that is why many of our early religious forebears were essentially kicked out of Europe and were some of the first Europeans to come to this continent. And what they did is they set up their free congregations, of course, and for a couple hundred years, they practiced forms of democracy within their congregations, while calling their own ministers, making decisions collectively, while they were living within a monarchy. So they were really creating an alternate model of the world that could be. And many commentators like James Luther Adams and others speak to this as being historically one of the a great impetus for the American Revolution itself, is that in these congregations, our Congregationalist forebears had a working model of the world that could be, and then were able to bring it out and also bring in other models, examples like the indigenous model of the Iroquois Confederacy, to create a democratic society. So we've done it before. We can do it again. And so I'll leave you with that and hope that this can start conversations and, like I said before, collective dreaming about how we can be creating new models as we respond to the tragedy and as we move out of the pandemic. Now, the last thing I'll leave you with is on the gravestone of Buckminster Fuller, The quote on it says, "Call me trim tab." And I don't know if any of you know what a trim tab is, but I certainly didn't. A trim tab is on a really big ocean liner, a big, cargo ship. The size of the rudder is just too large to turn on its own. It would just tear itself apart. So there's another rudder on the rudder that's called the trim tab, which turns this way, it turns the rudder this way, and then, 15 minutes later, the ship turns. So he says, call me trim tab. And I want to leave you with that sentiment, that we are that trim tab. And what we can create together in practicing interdependence in the lived lives and the day-to-day of our communities, our congregation, our families, our friends, that's how we can embody interdependence, and we too can be trim tab. Go in peace.
Our closing words today are sort of related to what Reverend Hollister said about being a trim tab. We can make a difference. The closing words are by Maureen Kilran. No matter how weak or frightened we may feel, we each have gifts that can make a difference in the world. In this coming week, may you do at least one thing to support the broken, to welcome the stranger, to celebrate what is worthy, to do the work of justice and the work of love. Be strong, be connected, each day act, so you may be just a little more whole. Thank you for joining our gathering today. I hope you have been inspired and uplifted by sharing this time together. You can support the work and mission of this congregation with your financial contribution. For those in our chapel today, you will find baskets at the back to receive your gift. For those participating virtually, I invite you to take a moment to visit our website, amherst.org. And click on the giving link or text your gift to 833-987-1968. Please join me as we extinguish our chalice with these words. May the circle be open, yet unbroken. May the love we have found here be ever in our hearts. Merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again.
We do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel this way with us, so be swift to love and make haste to be kind. Go in peace.